Uh, yes. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-azim. There is no power or strength except from Allah, the Tremendous. And I think Ramadan reinforces that for us. Alhamdulillah. Good to be here. Thank you, Ahmed, of course, for inviting me to do this session. Um, I enjoyed Abdul Qadir's session last week, and in fact, he spurred me on to do a lot of further research, as it were. Um, yeah, so I enjoyed that. So one thing, I was looking at we're looking at the Sokoto Jihad, the Sokoto Caliphate of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio. Not just him, but he's the spearhead of it. And I wanted to start with sort of giving a timeline of the of affairs because Abdul Qadir, when he spoke about what happened in Morocco and how people sort of held on to the deen in Morocco, he mentioned a particular date in 1844. I think was the Battle of Morocco, which seems to be a sort of pivotal point in um, the French taking over Morocco and saying Algeria was a part of France, etc. So I looked at the timeline and realized that we're probably talking 90 years either side of that. 1844 is what we'll be covering, and I thought it's relevant because it is the same continent of Africa, and as far as I'm aware, Africa is the only continent with a Muslim majority. So, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, so I thought I'd give a before I sort of go into more details, sort of more anecdotal things, I'd give a timeline of things around the Sokoto Caliphate, and you have to remember that people had been becoming Muslim in in Africa for centuries. So we have in around the 1100s, we have the founding of Timbuktu as a place of learning in West Africa, and very early on, and Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, when we get to the Sokoto Caliphate, they were very much of the Timbuktu tradition, that Maliki tradition. And you have the empires like the Mali Empire in the 1200s, the 1600s. You had the Songhai Empire from sort of mid 1400s, and these are the big West African empires that were well known. Um, the Mali Empire, people will know the name of Mansa Musa, for example, and with the Songhai Empire, people will know of Sonny Ali. Um, just as relevant to in around 1525, so this is around 200 years before we're going to talk about, that's when the first slave ships were leaving Africa to go to the West. Um, so these means they're Europeans along the West African coast, right? So you have to remember that. And Sheikh Uthman himself was born in 1754, so it's worth bearing that in mind. And we have, not long after that, we have the French Revolution taking place in the world. And in about 1794, Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, who we're going to be talking about, who was the leader of this Sokoto jihad that took place in West Africa, who's grown up in this very Timbuktu tradition, this very traditional Maliki tradition. He's taken on Sufism, etc. He gets a vision in about 1794 that he has to wield the sword of truth, and he writes a book called Iya Asuna wa Ikmad al Bida, the revival of the Sunnah and destruction of innovation. And that we'll talk about that shortly. And we have a series of meetings not long after that taking place with the Sultan at the time, the different sultans actually at the time. One called Bawa, we'll talk about, who saw the growing Jamaat, the Muslims getting stronger and stronger, and was a bit worried. And the Sheikh made certain demands of him, which we'll talk about. Then we have coming up, we have the whole jihad, which we'll talk about, and the players involved, and then we have the British, if you like, coming into West Africa and looking. But that's interesting. We'll talk about that because that comes later when we talk about the demise of the caliphate, and a lot of that is to do with the British coming into West Africa. Not so much coming into West Africa, coming further into West Africa, and we have the players we'll talk about, the big names. We'll talk about Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, who, if you like, the main protagonist, and also his brother Abdullahi Danfodio, excuse me, and also his son Muhammad Bello, who became the caliph after him. So those are the big the names we'll talk about. And we'll also talk about something called the Treaty of Berlin. I'll refer to the timeline as we go on. But I want to start by talking. So when Sheikh Uthman Danfodio was born, I said it's people becoming Muslims for generations, but the deen had never been established in that way anywhere. You had Muslim rulers, Muslim kingdoms, but there never been this this cleansing, never been a jihad. It had all come through trading and making links and people traveling. So that's how the deen really traveled to West Africa. And there was this, people may remember the whole sort of Almoravids, the Marabatoon, the original Marabatoon, going from North Africa, going northwards into Spain. And then there was that sort of southern thrust that trickled down into West Africa and so on. So that's, and people traveling. So there's always been this long line of, from the early days, people becoming Muslim, but no big thrust that you could talk about, no big jihad, etc. So the Sheikh himself, Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, he's a Fulani. He's from the Fulani tribe in West Africa. But the area where he's grown up is called Hausa land. It's where the Hausa people dominate, and the language spoken is mainly Hausa, even though he would have had Fulani as his mother tongue. And he was from a very, very, very educated family, because his name, Danfodio, means son of the learned, you know, like son of the scholar. So he grew up in a very scholarly household. And his brother Abdullahi says something here about his education, talking about Sheikh Uthman Danfodio's education. So we'll refer to him as the Sheikh. He says, the Sheikh read the Quran with his father, learned Al-Ishriniya and similar works with Sheikh Uthman. He learned syntax, the science of grammar, and this is with his Sheikh, who was his cousin. He read Al-Muqtasa with our paternal uncle, known as Biduri. The Sheikhs he studied with were pious and well known for their piety. He continues, now Sheikh Uthman informed me that he had learned Quranic exegesis, tafsir, from the son of our maternal and paternal uncle, and that he was present at the assembly of Ashim al-Zanfari and heard from him the Quranic tafsir from the beginning of the Quran to the end of it. He learned the science of tradition from our maternal uncle and paternal uncle. And he also learns Bukhari and Muslim from him, who gave him a license, ijaza, to teach them. So that's just giving you an idea of, that's just the learning he had within his own family. People teached him Bukhari and Muslim and licenses to teach, and he was learning the great books of Maliki fiqh. And one of his main teachers, Sidi Mukhtar, at the time was very concerned with the decline of knowledge as he saw it in West Africa, in that region. And he was really upset with the scholars at the time. And he thought he was really, the ones he singled out were the ones who had knowledge but failed to put it into practice. Those who presented an appearance of compliance with outward knowledge and religious duties, but it was all down to vanity. Those who presumed they had the exclusive right to guide common people, yet they had, as he called it, unholy alliances with the sultans. And those who engaged in jihad, but only to obtain fame and wealth. So this is the teaching that Sheikh Uthman Danfodio grew up in. And then what happened in 1790, when he was in his 30s, he had this vision that he was given the sword of truth, and he must be the person wielding this sword of truth across West Africa. And that's the time when he came up with this book. He wrote this book, Iya Asuna wal Ikmad al-Bida, the revival of the Sunnah and destruction of innovation. The nature of this book, it's a big work. You could say it's a work of fiqh, but it's all about, as it says, the revival of the Sunnah, and he really attacks the practices, you know, the bid'ah that he sees creeping into things. So, for example, I had an outline from the book when he talks about inheritance, and he talks about the laws of inheritance. He doesn't give the whole thing about the 1/6 going to this person and 1/8 to that person. He just sort of reminds us what the Quran says about inheritance, that you don't inherit from the prophets, don't leave inheritance, that you don't inherit from non-Muslims, etc. He gives that, but then he goes into all the other things that he calls the bid'ahs that have been associated with inheritance. And the key things he talks about are, not giving women inheritance, giving all the inheritance to the eldest son, etc., etc., etc. So he attacks those things which he sees are bid'ahs coming into society. So that's the nature of the battle he had to bring forward. So in going forward now, I wanted to follow what's outlined in a book called a book by Ibrahim Suleiman, when he talks about the jihad of Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. And it's the same book actually that has been rewritten or edited actually by Sheikh Abdul Haq Bewley and reissued as the African Caliphate. And I thought I would just follow some of those chapters so that we can see the parallels to what happened in Medina, what happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what happened with the first community, and also some parallels with our own situation here, you could say in the West, but also particularly things that I've been involved with in Norwich and before that as well. So the first thing he talks about, the first chapter, is raising the students. And he, with the Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio, was really aware that if he wanted to, to revive the deen, and he was known as the renewer, the Mujaddid, the renewer, if he wanted to renew the deen, he realized you had to build the students. And so he took on the whole thing of now setting up classes and building the students and teaching what we call this very traditional Maliki tradition. But he was also aware that you have to teach other things, as it were. So he made sure they learned rhetoric and logic were all part of the curriculum. So the areas he had were Arabic, fiqh, starting with Al-Akhdari, if people know that very short book by Sheikh Al-Akhdari, to the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Karawani, which a lot of us have been through. Then the Muqtasar of Khalil, we know, which is a much higher level book. He taught the students poetry, rhetoric, logic. They started with Tafsir Jalalain, which, if people know, is a very sort of basic Tafsir book. And then that was actually replaced that with a book by his brother, Abdullah did. Then there was obviously Quran memorization, Hadith, which was usually Bukhari, Muslim, and the Muwatta, and then Tawheed and Tasawwuf. So they were the big subjects, if you like, that he taught the students. And from him, you realize that lots of awliya, lots of teachers, lots of even military leaders came from that, from his teachings. And people may also know this book, The Handbook on Islam, that translated wonderfully by Aisha Bewley, which comes from some of the works from Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio. And I just wanted to mention how simple Sheikh Usman would make his teachings. He would really simplify things for people. And a tradition, and it's actually something I use here when I'm actually teaching and I'm teaching the students. I take this, what he said here about Tawheed, and I just wanted to read it to you to see how he made things simple that people can understand. He says the poor man in need of his Lord. Praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, and blessings and peace be upon the messenger of Allah. May Allah bless him and grant him peace. This definition, the roots of the life transaction, will be of use if Allah wills to whoever look to it for support. I say, and success is by Allah, that the whole universe, from the throne to the spread carpet of the earth, is in time, and its maker is Allah. May he be exalted. His existence is necessary from before endless time, no beginning to him, no end to him, going on forever. He is not affected by anything in time. He has no body and no attributes of body. He has no direction and no place. He is as he was before pre-existence, wealthy beyond dependence on place or designation. He is one in his essence, attributes, and actions. He is powerful by his power, transforms by his will, knows by his knowledge, lives by his life, hears by his hearing, and speaks by his speech. He has complete freedom in acting or leaving undone. Divine perfection is all necessary to him, but deficiency, the opposite of divine perfection, is impossible for him. All the messengers from Adam to Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant them peace, are truthful and trustworthy, and they conveyed what they were commanded to convey to creation. All human perfection is necessarily theirs, but all human imperfections are impossible for them. Permitted to them are eating, drinking, marriage, buying and selling, and illness, which does not lead to imperfection. The angels are all preserved from wrong action. They do not disobey Allah in anything he commands, and they carry out all they are commanded to do. They are created from light, neither male nor female, and they do not eat and they do not drink. The books from heaven are all true and real. Death at its appointed time is true. The question of by Munkar and Nakir is true. The punishment of the grave is true. The ease of the grave is true. The day of rising is true. The awakening of the dead on that day is true. The gathering of the people in one place is true. The giving of the book is true. The narrow bridge is true. The weighing of actions is true. The reckoning is true. Drinking from Kawthar is true. The fire is true. The garden is true. Everything that Muhammad came with, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, is true. These are the roots of the life transaction. And I mention that because just so you get a feel for how the teaching takes place. I liken that to the sort of teaching of the multiplication tables, that you teach children the multiplication tables, even if they don't understand what's going on, and later on they get to understand what they've learned. And it's a bit like that. It's as Ibn Abi Zayd says in his the Risala, that it's like etching something on the stone when you teach children. So I just want to see that simplicity, how he talks about Tawheed, and that would be passed on as a sort of a first understanding to the students. And also, in terms of the curriculum, it's when we are here in Norwich, when for example we set up the Norwich Academy, we looked at what Sheikh Uthman Danfodio had taught. We looked at what had gone on before us here in Norwich, in Spain, La Maestranda, what the Sheikh Abdul Qadir had taught us. And it's uncanny that you do come up with, you can't do better than that, as it were. We added some other things, but it's really that I think if you're taking the deen forward, we do have to start with raising the students, as Sheikh Uthman said. But after really going in and setting the curriculum for the students, the next chapter in the book, in fact, and he did, was building the community. And the big thing with Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, he concentrated on a few things to build the community. He looked at the building the aql, the intellect of people. He taught people to really take seriously and understand tawbah, this seeking forgiveness from Allah. It's like and if you look at many of the books of fiqh, they start with tawbah. So he's taken that on, he's gone and he's taught the people and said, you must understand and take on tawbah. And he pushed people to understand and take on the what we call zud, the doing without, not wanting everything in this world, because he'd seen that as a big corruption in society. And he pushed again this whole thing of preference, wanting for your brother, what you want for yourself, and preferring your brother over yourself. And he would often talk about that, that story of the Muslims in jihad, when someone was dying and someone came from water and he said, no, give that one first. And then the person went to that person, give it to that person first. And then finally the last person got the water and the others had died when he got back to them. So he used to use that story quite a lot in teaching the people to prefer each other. And you have to remember, he was of the Qadiriyya. He's a man of Tariqa, of the Qadiriyya Tariqa. And he also talked about the obligations that people had to each other. So that the children had to its parents, and parents had to their children, and a man to his wife, and a wife to a husband, etc. He was very much teaching people their obligations. And we'll later on, we'll talk about what he said about women being educated. He was very much clear that, it was a wrong action not to, to make, if you didn't let your women be educated, and that in fact they should in fact even disobey their husbands if it meant getting educated. So he's built the students. Sheikh Uthman has built the students, or trying to build the students, and he's building this community of people who who understand the deen and understand it and take it on in a real way, And for those people who know Sheikh Abdul Qadir, you probably get that feeling from him over the years as well. And then the rhetoric steps up now. The rhetoric steps up and he starts to invite people to what is good. He starts to invite people. Do you understand? So he started by training the young people, building them from scratch. Then he's taught the existing community, the older people, explaining the deen to them. And then how he's starting now, once that is done, although it's ongoing, now you have to start inviting people to the deen, inviting people to what is good. So the rhetoric and the intention take a step up at this point. He addresses the decay and decline in society and that something has to be done. Pretty much getting ready to take over society that is falling apart, rather than waiting until the society hits rock bottom. Do you understand? So he's not, he's not waiting the wings, wait for society to collapse and then we take over. He's saying that you have to, when you see society decaying, you have to start preparing to take over. So that's obviously a lesson for us here. And then he also said you had to prepare for physical, for jihad, for war. But he was very, very clear that people shouldn't think you jump to this. You don't prematurely jump to jihad, but you had to prepare. And for those people who've read, for example, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, you know that the whole purpose is about you prepare for war in order that you don't have to fight, that you win the battle without fighting, but you can only do that by preparation. So he was very much, you prepare for these things, but you do not prematurely jump into the jihad. So he was clear that you call people to the whole deen. For example, we have Ahmed has his he launched the local Zakat initiative, which he talked about last year, and you probably hear it playing on the radio sometimes if you listen to UK Muslim radio, and he's very much speaking about the local aspect of zakat, collecting it locally, not talking about, for example, the authority needed or paying gold and silver, etc. And another initiative like the New Crescent Society, these guys talking about the looking at the moon before you start each month and seeing the moon as opposed to calculations, etc. And they don't necessarily talk about the politics of it all and the emir or declaring Ramadan, etc. But so, and there's a good reason for those things. You're sort of giving people what they can take at the moment. But still, Sheikh Uthman Danfodio is very clear. You still have to make sure people know what the whole truth is. You still have to convey out the whole picture, what the deen's about, even though you may lead with one small part of it. And because we always talk here about uniting the Muslims, but you can only unite around the truth. So he's very clear that you have to call people to the deen, and also that the people doing the calling, people have to have that basic understanding. People have to have that basic understanding of the deen. And I think a lot of us have seen if you don't have a basic understanding of the deen, then and you're calling people to certain things which seem quite high, then you can undermine the call. So we have to be careful of that. So the Jamaat with Sheikh Uthman Danfodio now is getting quite well known, getting established. It's taken on an identity of its own. And in 1795, the Sultan of the area, he's getting a bit upset with the Jamaat now. He sees that this is like another alternative power. It's like a competition for him. And the Sheikh Uthman Danfodio had previously met the previous Sultan and had demanded that Muslims be given a certain respect. He said because they're wearing the turban and the women are wearing the head covering, and he's like, you need to respect these people and treat them with respect. And the previous Sultan had agreed to that. But the new Sultan that came in, one called Nafata in 1795, he didn't agree. He wanted to create conflict with the Muslims. He was not happy with them, and he stipulated that no one but the Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio, should be able to preach, to talk. No one but the Sheikh should do that. No one should become Muslim unless they grew up as Muslim. No one could take the Shahada and become Muslim. All those who had embraced Islam needed to return to their previous religion. So people had to give up Islam according to this Sultan and go back to whatever paganism they were practicing before. No man should wear the turban. So he banned the turban. People should not wear the turban. And no woman should wear the head covering in the form of hijab. And he decreed that in 1795. Needless to say, that didn't go down well with the Sheikh. But it does remind me, of course, that here in 2021 in France, we have Macron, who's probably as bad as Sarkozy in the end, and they're banning the hijab. We already know that Turkey, for example, secular Turkey, had banned women from going to the university wearing the hijab, for example, and we know that the fez had been banned. But here in 2021, France, they're banning the hijab from women, and they're saying you can't go on school trips with your children if you're wearing the hijab. And they're saying that certain shops, if you're a local sort of community shop, they're saying you need to sell alcohol and you need to sell pork because that's what the local people eat, because there are too many Muslims taking over these shops, etc. So you see the parallels from 1795 to 2021. It hasn't stopped. So with this decree from Nafata, he puts this decree out to say this will happen with the Muslims, they have to do this. But fortunately, he dies very soon afterwards. So it's almost like the last thing he did. So the Sheikh sort of continues, and the community still begins to grow. And I'll continue for the moment with this line. So he's talking about society, and he's criticizing society. He's not criticizing people in general, and he's saying that he's talking about how people should behave, and he's saying that he's talking about bid'ah, but he's saying there are good bid'ahs, like the Tarawih prayer we've been doing. He said there are bad bid'ahs like unjust taxes, and permissible bid'ahs to do with things like technology. So he's talking about that, and he talks a lot at the time. He talks a lot about marriage, the Sheikh. He talks about people marrying, for the sake of the deen, and getting married as soon as you can afford it. Trying to find a spouse with a good disposition, and guardians not stopping women getting married because of the dowry, etc. Making sure that if you have a marriage, celebrate the walima. And he was very upset with people taking the dowry, the father or the wali taking the dowry from the woman, etc. So he attacked all these small things in society that seem small. He made a huge thing about them. He talked about trade, and he talked about people understanding business, that people making sure people understood the rules of trade and commerce, the thick of it when they entered into it, and was really upset that that people who didn't understand it were doing business. He felt that wasn't right. He talks about women who were forced to go and trade in the market because the men wanted to sit down at home, And although he was for women doing trading, etc., it was, he still saw the market as a dangerous place for women to be by themselves, etc. So, and again, he felt also sending out women to trade if they didn't understand the trade in the thick of trade was also a wrong action. So all that is going on, and he's getting this being opposed by that sultan, the previous one and the new one, and he now starts on what we call the intellectual war at this point, and he prioritized in the intellectual war. He's talking about the conditions of women was a big thing he talked about, and unjust people and unqualified people kind of giving judgments. He talks about the conditions of the market. He talks about that, you know, the rules of the market and people trading the market. And remember, these are very big trading societies, market societies. And he also talks about the people using witchcraft, etc. So he's talking about the ills in society. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the actual, now the conflict with the Sultan, but just before that, he talks very much about women learning. Here's something he said. The scholars who opposed women's education were merely hypocrites. They abandoned their wives, daughters, and servants to ignorance, while they gave knowledge to other people. How they could leave their wives, daughters, and servants in the darkness of ignorance and error, while they teach their students day and night, this is nothing but the pursuit of their selfish ends, because they teach their students only for show and out of pride. This is a great error. The education of wives, children, and dependents is an obligation, while the teaching of students is voluntary. It becomes an obligation only when there is no one else to do it. So despite this, you know, this thing that's always put about women not being educated in the deen, Sheikh Uthman Danfodio was very much that you had to educate the women, and that the women, you know, had the permission to disobey their husbands to make sure they got taught, as it were. He was very clear on that. And I do remember Hajar Aisha Bruli once talking about a conversation she'd had with some Moroccan women, talking about women scholars, and they were saying that actually they used to study the deen a lot, and it's when the French came that it stopped. You know, so you see how it's put backwards, that and we're taught the other thing. We're taught that the men didn't want the women to learn, but actually there was a tradition of women scholars, and here in West Africa there was a tradition with Sheikh Uthman Danfodio of teaching Muslim women. So we said the Sheikh met the ruler of Gobir, who's, first of all, his name was, he's in about 1788. He met the first Sultan Bawa, who although he was a little bit apprehensive about the Muslims, he agreed to give them all the respect that had been asked for. And that the things he asked for were that there should be a free hand to call people to the deen, no hindrance should be placed before anyone who wishes to become a Muslim, and that there should be respect for, you know, the Muslims. But of course, I said, he died, and this Nafata took over and gave this decree that people rescinding all that and really opposing the Muslims. And when he died, the next ruler who came in was one called Yunfa, and he now really asked the Sheikh to leave. We actually put it on the Sheikh, and this was in around 1803. He said to Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, I'm expelling you from, I think it's Degel, where they were staying. He said, I'm expelling you from here, you have to leave. And the Sheikh said, okay, I'll leave, but my people are coming with me. And he left, and the whole Jamaat left with him. And the whole Jamaat left with him, and the Sultan then relented and sent messages to him to say, come back, because no one wants to see your town being emptied, your city being emptied. And you'll find that this hijra is a recurring theme in the Sokoto Caliphate. And Sheikh Uthman Danfodio sent a message back and said, we'll only come back if these certain things are met, certain conditions were met. And the Sultan, Yunus at the time, he couldn't meet those demands. And so they started to harass the Muslims, started to, you know, waylay them, kill them, kidnap them, sell them to slavery, etc., etc. So this is now the beginning of the conflict. So it's 1803, and now with this conflict happening, because remember, Sheikh Uthman Danfodio he's been the teacher up till then, and they decide, well, at this time we need an emir, a leader, and he was chosen as a leader. So before that, he was very much the spiritual leader, but they chose him now as the sort of commander in chief as well. So he became what we call the Amir al-Mu'mineen. And it's interesting, he drew that differentiation between the spiritual leader and the sort of political leader. And So now the conflict is happening. Yunfa is directly opposing the sultans, opposing the sheikh. Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio is now the Emir al-Mu'mineen. And in this time, you remember, there's no link. There's no real positive link to, say, the Ottoman Empire, which is going through its own stages of decline at the time. And in North Africa, there are no positive links with the Muslims of North Africa coming. In fact, some of the Arabs are coming down and engaging in the slave trade as well, and actually taking slaves north and selling them in Morocco, or taking them north and selling them onwards to European slavers as well. So it's so often people say that the deen flourished in West Africa, despite the Arabs, as opposed to because of them. So then they had what we call their Badr and their Uhud. So again, the similarities with the first community are so true. They had the battle of the first battles was of Tabin Kwato, is the place name, and it was a big victory for them, big significant victory that sent a message around the whole region, and they won. The Muslims won, and it was a big decisive blow to the Sultan Yunfa. And I really very much like Badr. You'd be surprised at the similarities to it, and of course it meant more people joining the Jamaat, more people coming on board. It set the tone. But also, not long after that, they also had their Uhud, Battle of Suntua, I think it was called, yeah. And it really was, again, where it was devastating. They lost many Quran reciters, Hufaz of Quran. Hundreds were lost. Yeah, it was bloodshed. The Muslims, lots of Muslims were killed. It was really a massive blow to the Muslims. But like Uhud, it would lead on to good coming from it. And then after that, there are many battles across the whole region, and the Muslims are moving. So often it's called a circular hijra, because they were very much, in that sense, nomadic at the time, moving one place to another, and you see they went sort of around the region. And his brother, Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio's brother, Abdullah, was seen as very strict, if you like, very, very strict. And after they'd lost that battle of Suntawa and other things, he was really disillusioned with the discipline in the army, because the way they'd lost it, a bit like, I think Uhud was when they had to, was it the archers who were told to stay in one place? Here there were certain infantrymen who were infantrymen, I think, who were told to stay in one particular place and guard the rear. And the indiscipline in the army led them to them running off, and I think, again, probably looking for the booty as well. And that led to the defeat, or one of the factors of the defeat, by Allah. So the similarities, again, I said, very much like Uhud. And Abdullah, who was very much, as learned as well, but very much a very straight person, probably a little bit like Umar ibn Khattab. And he was so disillusioned with the discipline of the army and the people in it that he said, I'm going off on Hajj. He decided to go off on Hajj at the time. And but I think he reached as far as Kano. And then when he reached Kano and he saw the state of the people and the people wanted there, he sort of settled there and started teaching the people there in Kano. And Kano today is one of the big cities, and one of the last cities to fall. So the Sultan, so now the jihad is happening, and eventually there is a military success, or it's becoming a success. And Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio starts to concentrate on how society should be run, how a society should be governed. So he's doing this. Remember, he's writing some of these books while he's fighting. While he's fighting in between battles, he's writing some of these big books he's written. And he talks about the structure of society, how it needs to be when the Muslims take over. And in a sense, he's not waiting, though. He's not waiting until the Muslims take over. He's putting these things in place right at the beginning. And he is the Amir al-Mu'mineen, but he's appointing emirs. So you have to have emirs. He's appointing emirs around the region. He's giving people the flag of the jihad, and he's taking them and he's giving them leadership. So he's appointing emirs in all these places, who are very much sort of independent emirs, but with the loyalty to the Emir al-Mu'minin, to the whole caliphate. And he talks about the need for a strong wazir. And I don't know if people listening or have read the book, The Muslim Prince. Sheikh Abdul Qadir talks about that the wazir, a good wazir, being described as the red sulfur, and the red sulfur being the thing that the people who make gold, who claim they make gold. Sorry, I can't remember the word. That the thing that they would say would help transform, the lead into gold, was this red sulfur, So he describes, so Sheikh Abdul Qadir describes these a good wazir, as the red sulfur. And Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio says the wazir is the one who wakens him, the emir, who wakens him when he sleeps, gives him sight if he cannot see, and reminds him when he forgets. So very much, again, the strong wazir, the quality of the wazir is as important as the quality of the emir. Then they would appoint governors, who were like the sort of main administrators over particular areas, who came under the emirs. Then he would have the judiciary, the qadis. Muhammad Bello, the son of Sheikh Uthman, put them above the wazirs, but Sheikh Uthman had them at this point, if you like, under the wazirs. And he also made that office the kind of the office of, you could kind of call it a bit like the ombudsman, the office of public complaints. So the qadis were not there just to give the judgment, chop off this one's hand or something, that kind of stuff. It was also to, people could complain about things not happening to the qadis. So he thought that was very important. Then he had a position called the Wali al-Rad, the reviewer, which is like the court of appeal, that people could appeal against decisions from the qadis, if you like. But Abdullah was not keen on that. Abdullah Dan Fodio was not keen on having this review. He felt that undermined the qadis, the role of it. But he did have this in place. So this Wali al-Rad, this reviewer, this ombudsman was there. And then from that, he says, then you have the ulama. And the ulama, the scholars, they are there to for social morality, to teach people their responsibilities, to teach people what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. So that's where he has the ulama. And then he would have what we call the mutasib. The mutasib, a very important role for him. The mutasib ran the markets, and anything to do with social and financial justice and sort of public morality in the public space, building regulations and things like that. That would all come under this mutasib. It wasn't just that he ran the market. So the mutasib was a very big position in society. And then he'd also have what he called the Sa'i, or the Sa'ino, which is the person responsible for collecting zakat. And it wasn't just the zakat they collected, it was also they would deal with traveling nomads, etc., and deal with their situation, their problems, and how, dealing with those people. So the Sa'i, this zakat collector, was also a big position, and he saw those as the key appointments that you needed to run a society. And it's worth knowing that this is still the norm, is like what they call small government. It's not like now everything is unwieldy government. It was very much a small government. Small government. And I was listening to a talk just earlier on the radio with Hajj Sadullah Yates, talking about how people welfare in the early Muslim society, and he was reiterated how very loose it was. It wasn't this big unwieldy thing. It was very informal, and it was very much like that with Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio and how he saw governance. So we're talking now. So the Muslim community is taking shape now. The jihad has been won, and the three key actors in the Emirate, in the Caliphate, are Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio himself, and his brother Abdullahi, and also his son Muhammad Bello. They're the three. They're the sort of uh, Muhammad, peace be upon him, Abu Bakr and Umar. You know, that's them. And the Sheikh continues ruling for a time, and then he devolves leadership to Abdullahi and Muhammad Bello. When he, he's still alive, he's not, he just sort of retires and hands it over to them. And I think, if as far as I remember, that Abdullahi became pretty much the leader of the West and Muhammad Bello towards the East. I think that's how it sort of panned out. And this would have been in around 1812. And so far, I haven't talked about any trouble within. There were obviously trouble from time to time. There was trouble, and people wanted to sort of take over or rise up, or etc., as they were with the first community, and they would have been put down. But very much, it carried on as the Sokoto Caliphate existed and didn't have major trouble from within, as it were. So the Sheikh during his coming up, there were miracles that had happened to him. He talked about a miracle when he was able to, know everything going on in his body, etc. He talks about these different miracles that happened to him, and they were well known. But later on now, people are calling him the Mahdi. People are saying that Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio was the Mahdi, and he denied this. Yeah, and he wrote something about it, saying he's not the Mahdi. And I'll just read a piece of it. He says, "Know also, my brethren, that I'm not Imam Mahdi, and that I have never claimed the Mahdiya, albeit that is heard from the tongues of other men. Verily, I have striven beyond measure in warning them to desist, and explicitly rejected their claim in my Arabic and Ajami writings. For example, I said in one of my Arabic compositions, namely Al-Kabah, my purpose in writing this book is not to affirm that I am the Imam Mahdi. My purpose in writing is to explain to you that Allah the Exalted has favored me with conditions which agree with the conditions of the Imam Mahdi that the ulama have mentioned in their books. My object is to comply with the command of Allah, make the favors of thy Lord manifest. And after I mentioned these conditions, I said, the Imam Mahdi, however, has certain secret attributes which nobody else can possess. Verily, there is a wide difference between the drone of a fly and the melody of a bee. In one of my Ajami compositions, for example, I mentioned 33 characteristics which I shared with the Mahdi, and then I said, I am not the expected Mahdi, though it is his garment I wear. I am the clouds that precede the awaited Mahdi, and it is for me, and it is for this that I am associated with him. So it was very clear that he was not the Mahdi, but it's very clear that he did have a high position. So you could say not shy in coming forward in that sense. So the caliphate is happening, and it's widening across West Africa, or it's going into where we call Niger and sort of Cameroon and around there. It's coming south into sort of Yoruba land, and it's widening, and more people are coming under the caliphate and recognize the caliphate. And again, so goes on, and then at some point, when the sheikh dies, he hands over power to. Well, he doesn't actually. A set of people, a delegation, if you like, they were put forward to decide. They decide on Muhammad Bello, the son of Sheikh Usman Dan Fodio, to be the sultan at this time. And Abdullahi doesn't like that. Abdullahi, the brother, now the uncle of this man, doesn't like it because it thinks it might produce a hereditary monarchy, and he doesn't think that is correct. So he opposes it on that ground. But he does accept him as the emir. There's a story that, that because Abdullahi was so hard, that when he was coming to the gates, I can't remember which city they're in, that when he was coming, they locked the gates so that he wouldn't come in and be chosen as the emir. But I don't think that's true, but it's often repeated. And and so many stories. But the sheikh did say that once he died, some people would go back to paganism, etc. And that is the case, that some people did. Once he died, tribes reverted and so on and so forth. So there more trouble within the within the caliphate, as you'd expect. And there did arise another, if you like, opposing caliphate did grow up in what you call the Borno area. Al-Kanimi ran this, and so that was part of the previous Borno Empire. And I think that was sort of Chad, Niger, Libya, that way, sort of coming down. So you can see it extended very far. And this Al-Kanimi became the Sultan of that area, and ended up having been at war with Mohammed Bello, if you like, but no one quite knew why. They were sort of at war with each other. Even Mohammed Bello claimed he didn't actually know why they were fighting, but there was a respect and there was a correspondence going on. So you don't know if there was a jealousy, whatever. There was a lot of writing going on between the two sultans, but the Sokoto Caliphate is there, it's intact, and it's repelling any trouble. So now we're looking at we have to now bring into the story the Europeans, because they do play a part. In 1795, someone called Mungo Park, a British supposedly explorer called Mungo Park, arrives into Gambia, saying he's a botanist, but really he's there to explore the river Niger, the Niger River. And if you know sort of British imperialism, they've often looked at the big giant waterways because, one, they wanted to find a route from the west coast, from the east coast, to go inland. So they were trying to source, find about the river Niger, and also they wanted to see quite clearly what they could get their hands on in terms of resources. So he's one of the first people who came, this Mungo Park, in 1795. And he was, well received, and people ask him why he's here, and he says, my king, likes to know about different flowers, etc. And people take him at his word. In 1795, and he reaches the Niger River, and he's exploring things, and he's making friends, as it were. And obviously, some people don't trust him. And what happens is that Mungo Park comes back in 1805 at the head of a gunship. he comes back to West Africa, and he comes at the head of a gunship, and he starts to plunder and sort of shoot on sight anybody who comes near him, to take the things they've plundered. And fittingly, he actually drowned in the Niger River, alhamdulillah. And then the next set of sort of Britons who came was a Major Dixon Denham, Hugh Clapperton, and a Commander Walter Oudney. Their focus was Lake Chad and also the River Niger. And they came from what I think would have been the Royal Africa Company. They were sent there, and but they had come through Tripoli. They had come from the Pasha of Tripoli, would have been the ruler of Tripoli at the time, the Muslim ruler of Tripoli. He had sent them with letters of introduction. And so all the Muslims accepted them. You get a letter of introduction from the Pasha, another Muslim ruler, you take it at face value. We'll honor these people, they're under our protection. But they really, again, they came very much as the spies. And at one point, one of them, I think it was Denham, he met with Al-Kanimi, the other sultan. He met with Al-Kanimi, and he had a conversation with him, and he asked him, so this Al-Kanimi said to him, okay, I want to hear about what's going on with you people. You're here, you're visiting, you're exploring, you say you're interested in, our plants, etc., and all these things, and it's you come as friends. He said, how far is India from where you guys live, Britain? He said, it's 4 months by sea. He said, okay. So why would you travel 4 months by sea to go and fight people in their own country, right? And he said, well, no, it wasn't really that. It was just that we were trying to do trade, and we wanted to get there before the Dutch and the French. He said, so you went as friends, but now you rule them. He said, no, we just have some places along the coast. They want us to be there. He said, okay. So what about Algeria? And other parts of North Africa? why are you fighting those people in Algeria? Why are the French, it's not the English, the British, the French, why are you fighting, no, so why are you Europeans fighting the Algerians? And he said, oh, well, they're pirates, you see. They're pirates, and they've been taking some of our people as slaves, and they don't keep their word. They're liars, they don't keep their word. I said, okay. So that was the answer that Denham gave to Al-Kanemi as to why, why these things were happening. So you see the West Africans were very clear. They still wanted to know what was going on, and they're very concerned with other Muslims. They're very concerned about these things: the plight of the Muslims in India, the plight of the Muslims in Algeria. And then one of the other of that team, Clapperton, he arrives in Sokoto, and he meets now Mohammed Bello, who's then the Caliph at the time. And Mohammed Bello says to him, look, your country has got to stop this Atlantic slave trade. You're taking slaves from the coast of West Africa, you take them, and we're hearing about it now. You've got to stop it. And he dictates a letter. He writes a letter to the King of England and says, give this to the king, and I think you need to stop doing that. And again, he talks about Algeria, and he talks about the subjugation of India. And while this Clapperton is there, Al-Kanemi now sends him a letter and says, do you know what? These guys are definitely spies. These guys are spies. You need to kill them. And Mohammed Bello says, no, I can't kill someone who's under my protection. And they just kind of detain them in the area. But despite that, the British were signing trade agreements. And we have to understand that at this time, Lagos in the south is pretty much a colony of Britain. They've taken over Lagos, and they're very much on the coast. The British are there, and they've taken over Lagos, and they're taking over parts of the southeast now. So they're really getting their hands on the southern part of what is now Nigeria, Yoruba land. So you've got the Yoruba people one side, you've got the Igbo people in the east, etc. Those are the dominant tribes there. And Britain is making inroads. A lot of trading, a lot of slave trading as well. And they were very much happy to instigate wars amongst the tribes, etc., in different regions, so that they would get the benefits of the slave trade. And what happens too is that it's the Industrial Revolution in Britain too. So the whole thing of the palm oil becomes another lucrative thing that they want, because it's the oil they're using to lubricate the machines of the new revolution. So by 1870, palm oil has replaced slaves as the main export from this area. And the justification for all of this is the what they call the Berlin Conference. In 1884, the European powers had a conference in Berlin. And what they did there, they said, look, we're all running to Africa and this is spearheaded by the Belgians. Remember the Belgian, this tiny little country in Europe that if Holland pushes down and Germany pushes in and France pushes up, there's nothing left of Belgium. But the Belgium have taken over the Congo. This small country has taken over the Congo area. So everybody is now, that's what they call the scramble for Africa. Everybody wants to get their piece of it. So the Europeans have this conference in Berlin, and they decide to say, well, it's really to say, wherever one of us has influence, the other should back off, because what they wanted to have a monopoly. They didn't want the Africans to be able to play off one against the other. So they wanted to make sure that wherever you traded, you had a monopoly, and you had to demonstrate that you were in control of this area. You had some control of this area to stop the others coming in. So that was what the Berlin Conference was about. And so Britain had said, we have these parts of what is modern day Nigeria, they said that's really us. They wanted to consolidate that, so they ended up having the Royal Africa Company, then the Royal Niger Company, and sending people there with these royal charters like they did in India, and claiming the land. And so they made inroads in the south. They made inroads in the south, and then but they really wanted the north. And just to really okay, yeah. So in terms of the demise of the caliphate, you should say, it was really coming from that. Britain had made headway commercially and then physically, militarily in the south, and they wanted to venture north, and they needed to take on the caliphate. It's moved on now to way beyond Bello now, and they start coming north, and it's a different proposition dealing with the Muslims. Mohammed Bello made it clear, and the Sultan at the time had made it clear, we're not interested in the British. We don't want you living amongst us. We don't want you coming amongst us. And they'd asked if Britain had asked if the people who worked for the Royal Niger Company could be governed by British law. And the Sultan said, no, none of that. If you're here, you're governed by our laws, etc. And to cut a long story short, if you like, it was really the Maxim gun, is it Maxim or Maxim gun, that really was the what gave Britain headway in the north. This gun that rattled off, I don't know how many rounds per minute. You remember people had rifles, odd rifles and things, and spears and swords, whatever. But this was an unknown thing. One man could sit there and kill thousands, or at least hundreds. And they had these guns like the Gatling gun, and they came north with that. And really, that is the story of how the north was really taken over. It was the superior firepower. It was Britain coming as friends, making trade agreements, and then pushing forward with military takeovers, making alliances with some of the tribes there going forward. And then it was a military takeover. And one by one, some of the great cities had fallen up in the north. And again, I think it's also the emir at that time, the caliph was Atahiru, his name was, and he, again, once the cities had fallen, it was hijrah, and thousands of Muslims again making hijrah. They're refusing to live under the British, and they start to make another hijrah. But again, the British now head them off and kill the Sultan and kill thousands again with this Maxim gun, just round after round after round after round after round. So the superior firepower kills off the Sultan, and they make a deal with the existing wazir at the time, and he says, look, we're not willing to give up our deen in that way. Do you promise that we can practice our deen? And he says, yes, you'll have freedom to worship. If you come back, you'll have freedom to worship. And he gives them all these conditions, and the wazir gives the conditions, and the British agree, and the wazir gives his allegiance to the British. And that's happening. So people have this sort of freedom. So the mosques are there, people are praying, and people are fasting, and people are paying zakat, etc. That's it with the British rule. And what Britain starts to do is impose taxes. And you have to remember now that that's what Britain wants. Britain wants the taxes, and they start to impose tax upon tax upon tax on the Muslims, but thinking that people would not pay zakat, because they saw the zakat as something that gave the emirs, because the emirs were still in place. The emirs were still in place, but obviously there's this allegiance to the British, as the head, the British, what do you call him? High Commissioner, whatever the person would be there at the time, governor. But they see this thing as zakat, and they see this zakat that's being collected is giving power to the emirs, because they're getting cattle and grain and money that they can distribute. And things are being supported by the zakat, and they want to undermine it. So one of the ways they undermine it is by increasing the taxes. And I know Ahmed would ask me this: how did people keep the deen going in these times of oppression? And what people did, they would always pay their zakat, no matter how much tax they tax the people, they would pay zakat. And this really started to frustrate the British. They really didn't like this thing, so they eventually outlawed zakat. They outlawed zakat and saying you can't, it's outlawed. People can't get it. You'll be locked up or punished if you collect zakat, and so on. So that became the position they took. But of course, people kept paying zakat in secret. People would do it, and also, alhamdulillah. And then I think eventually they try to say, okay, we can pay zakat, but we have to get our cut from it. It's like some of it can go to charity, but we have to get our cut from it. I can't remember the percentage they wanted from it. But it was really zakat is what they saw as the power behind the throne. And that's where they attacked. And it's never looked back. And so one of the papers I was reading was talking about the movement in Nigeria today to try and revive zakat in that way. People still know that they have to pay zakat, and people still do, especially in agriculture, people know what they have to pay, and that is still happening today. But really, so I mean, I've skirted over everything, but that really is how it was undermined, as the caliphate was undermined. And we do, when you move forward, you move into the 60s, we have a man named Ahmadu Bello, who was the first premier of what we call Northern Nigeria. Northern Nigeria, although it was amalgamated to Nigeria, at one point it had its own prime minister, and it was seen as the breadbasket of the Nigeria. They were the political power still. And a man called Ahmadu Bello, he was very clear about, so he was a grandson, great grandson of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio. And he had tried to really revive the North, but he was killed in a coup. And I went to Nigeria once. When I was in Nigeria, someone gave me a document he had produced. And for those of you who know what we talk about, the open market, it was a document where he had said, he'd outlined a whole thing about a market and the importance of markets, and physical drawings of what the market should look like. And he was also clear that the North, to stay strong, should not, I think it was told they should never send a live cow, for example, to the South. They should have their slaughterhouses and be sending meat and so on, but that's all gone. The North has been underdeveloped by the British deliberately. They made a point of not developing the North in terms of infrastructure, in terms of industries, etc. And the North is really suffering from that today as a result of that. But I see the time, and I've been, I know it's, getting close to Maghrib for many of us. So thank you for listening. Ahmed, if there are any questions or anything you'd like to say, I'll hand over to you. And I hope you've got something from it. I mean, I'll be honest, my research came up with about, just in simple notes, came up to 40 pages. So I've had to just, because it's so, when you actually get into it, it's amazing. So I'd recommend those books by Ibrahim Suleiman. I think Ahmed's going to post them on the chat.
Yes, Jamal. Thank you very much for sending through the bibliography. I'm going to share that afterwards on WhatsApp, and also share the recording. It's been absolutely tremendous, and it feels really kind of it feels like it's sort of ended somewhat prematurely. Like really, this warrants more than just one Zoom session. So maybe this is something we can continue.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, well, thank you, Ahmed. Thank everyone for listening. Probably too late for questions unless it's some burning one, but alhamdulillah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Thank you.